already getting baby interruptions.
This is quite an intro. I know it's already spring and getting close to summer and it's hot outside, but I'm wearing this sweater because I made it and it's cute. So, hello, welcome back to my channel. My name is Mildly Gothic. If you're new here, what I like to do is a variety of artsy things, often with a little bit of a dark twist. And today we're going back into that similar vibe. So, I'm going to do some embroidery. I've only really done one other embroidery project, and that is this little guy right here. This is Van Gogh's Starry Night. My parents and I went to the Van Gogh exhibit when it was in DC, and they were kind enough to buy me this. So this came out super cute. This was really fun. I learned some techniques, not a lot. So I'm kind of going into this with a lot of ambition and no experience. But when else do I ever do anything else around here? My ability to speak English today, struggle. The focus of the embroidery project for today is a subject matter that I like very much, and that is taking big, scary, creepy thing and making it stupidly cute. I have another video on my channel. I have two others of doing this. I have made a sculpture of it, and I've made a plushie of it. Can anybody guess what I'm gonna be making a patch of? It's cute Cthulhu! I don't care if this subject matter is overused on my channel. I'm in love with this painting I did. I'm going to be basically tracing this guy onto some fabric and then trying to turn him into a patch. The colors are going to be a little bit different. I'm using the colors I decided on in my plushie video, which you haven't checked it out, you totally should. It's absolutely one of my favorite projects I've done recently. I'm using the colors that I kind of decided on in that to lead my inspiration for the thread colors that I select. This should be a really fun project. At the end, will have a patch that I can put on, like whatever I want. If this does well, I like this project, so I'd love to do more. But if you guys happen to like it, maybe I'll do more in the future, and then later I can do a video of like putting all of my patches on a jacket. You know, maybe we can get to a video of that down the line, which I think would be really fun. I would just like to say hello and welcome to any of you who are relatively new to my channel. If you were watching the Mandalorian Armor videos, and subscribed and now you've stumbled onto this, hi, back to our semi-regularly scheduled programming. There is no regularly scheduled programming. The programming is chaos and crafting. So here's where we are today. So if this isn't the kind of content you'd like to see, but you really like the cosplay stuff, do please stick around. I do plan to have some more cosplay stuff coming up. Not necessarily Star Wars, so apologies, but I really enjoyed the process of putting that cosplay together, and I don't think I'm going to stop anytime soon. So I'm adding another crafting thing to my repertoire. At what point do I get the infinity gauntlet of craft hobbies? Anyways, I thank you very much for watching. If you've gotten to this point in the video, I know it's just the intro, but thank you so much. You might as well give it a like, or you can stick around and give it a like at the end if you like the final product. But regardless, let me know what you think of it in the comments down below. I'd love to hear from you. I love engaging with the comments. I think it's really fun. So thank you so much for watching, and let's get into it.
First up, I need an outline to serve as my guide. I don't have any of the water-soluble paper that you'll see some outlines and patterns come in, so I chose to just paint onto the fabric by hand. I also don't have any graphite paper or pencils that I thought were really going to show up. I don't have chalk, so I went with paint. It saturated the fibers enough that it stayed throughout all of my manhandling, and I could still see the color very clearly, and it didn't impact my ability to sew through it. Now that I had an outline, I decided to start with the sections that I knew I was going to have a stitched size reference for, and this is the tentacles. I did the suction cups on the tentacles with a technique that is known as the French knot. So you poke your needle up through the fabric, you wrap your thread 2 times around the needle, and then go back into the fabric at a point very close to where you came out of it from, but you need to hold that thread that is wrapped around your needle quite tight as you then pull the rest of the thread through, and do not let it go until the very last second so that you get a nice, neat, and secure French knot. Something that was really annoying about this metallic thread, and then also the thread that I used for the wings, was it did not want to stay tied in a knot. So I ended up doing double knots or some weird kind of like threading it through itself just to make sure that it would stay, because it really did not want to stay in a knot. It was very slippery. Now, I know that this may seem backwards as far as the way that I decided to do it, but I chose to do the suction cups first and then outline or block in the section of those arms, and it was because I'd actually kind of done a test. You may or may not be able to see it kind of on the bottom of the black fabric of a much larger version where I did the blue first and then did the French knots on top of it. It kind of distorted the way that the blue fill sat, and so I decided that taking the time to do the greater volume of smaller lengths of stitches was going to result in a better outcome, and I think I was right. I think it turned out really, really well. I had a lot of anxiety going into this project because I was honestly just winging it. Speaking of, I'm working on the wing. I'm the worst with puns, but anyways, the wing was the other thing that I knew, the right wing specifically was one that I knew I could be very confident with how it was, because I wasn't the most confident in my painted outline. It ended up being absolutely perfect, but I had more confidence in the way the right wing was placed, and so this is using a bunch of layering of stitches in sort of what's called a satin stitch. So you come out from the fabric, go a length across the top of your work, go down into the fabric, and on that same side you then come back out very close. So your stitches on the front side, you see the long, but on the back they're very short. You're only traveling small distances on the back of the project, and it makes the most use out of your thread. This is a little difficult when you're trying to cover large areas, and especially at an angle, and there's probably a better technique to do. At some instances you'll see that I will come out, I will choose to basically separate the fiber from my previous stitch by coming up through the middle of it. That's something you can kind of use to get a more continuous straight line, although often when I did that, especially for the outlines, I went over it twice because I thought it gave it a better, more full look. But doing embroidery like this, it's kind of called thread painting. I don't know if what I did here is exactly thread painting, but there is a technique called thread painting, where you are being very conscious and very purposeful with the directions that you are placing the thread, because just like with paintbrush strokes, the direction that you paint is the direction and the texture that your eye will see, and that can help add to the curve and the body of the shape. Once I had the whole center of the wing filled in is when I went and I did the ribbing details. I originally did these in my darkest blue, however, I decided that it wasn't quite the vibe that I wanted, and so I ended up going over those kind of next to it as if those were a shadow at the very end with the color that I ended up using for his body. So, starting with the main body color, I just filled in that back section of that right side tentacle. Again, very easy, very small. I knew what the shape was supposed to be. And I decided that the next thing I needed to tackle was his head. Now this probably could have been done more cleanly, but I did a bunch of small stitches trying to blend them as well as I could, but also keep the implication of some directionality and movement to the tentacles. Some of them came out better than others, and these are definitely probably the thing that least follows their painted outline, but I mean, I think they came out super cute. And I filled in the head with a satin stitch after I had outlined the top of it, kind of with that splitting method that I'd defined before, so going back through the thread of the previous stitch to kind of keep them all contained in a row. I did his eyes with basically stitches that followed the shape of the top part of a trapezoid, so, you know, angled, flat, and then angled, and I went back and forth over that once, I guess, back and then forth to make them nice and thick and so you could see it really easily. And I also did my absolute best not to disturb the satin stitch underneath, and it's here that you can kind of see what I was talking about with the French knots and how it kind of disrupts the stitch underneath. Here it wasn't that big of a deal, but I promise you when I tried to do the French knots before, it really was. It was when doing the head and the tentacles that I realized that having all of this thread of the same color butted up against each other was going to make it really hard and muddy to read, and so I chose to use that dark blue thread as basically a border and an outline between those pieces that were the same color, so the sides of the tentacles and then also the arms and the head. So I realized that I'd accidentally kind of created a very harsh border between his tentacles and his face, and while that may look good for something like the plushie, I just didn't think it suited this embroidery very well, and so I went back through and added small stitches that went into both the head and also the tentacles to try to blend those together a little bit more and make that edge not quite as harsh. My painting doesn't have this, my plushie doesn't have this, but I decided to give Cthulhu a little belly patch. Mostly I was very worried about having such a large swath of the one blue tone, and so I thought by doing this and bringing more of that lighter blue in, it was going to make him more cuddly, more friendly, and then also just make the design overall more appealing. I chose to do this at an angle with a satin stitch just to try to convey some more dimension and shape to the angle of his belly. I was very anxious to start the rest of the body because I wasn't sure what angle to do the stitches at, so I decided to go ahead with the other wing because I knew this was probably something I was going to be very comfortable with since I had completed the first wing and thought it looked pretty good. The only thing that made this a little challenging was making sure that I accounted for his little tentacle that poked into the wing a little bit, but that really wasn't a problem, and this wing went just about the same as the first. If you can't tell, I'm still avoiding the center of his body. I decided to do his little kicked out foot first. In the painting you can see the little suction cups underneath, and so I chose to do those here as well. I did 4 of them because I thought it fit the shape of his foot better. Again, these were French knots, and I filled in the back of the area with blue. Finally, the body! So I chose to do this in both kind of a just horizontal, but also trying to be at an opposite angle to the belly. I don't know, just not vertical, but also not the same angle as the belly. I went down one side until I ended up having to stretch over to the other, and then I went down the other side. I went over this portion a little bit more than I think I did the others, because I kind of want it to be a little bit fluffier, because, I don't know, it's his body, it's his belly, it should be a little pudgy. You know, a little puffy, little pudgy. He's a cute Cthulhu. He doesn't have to be, you know, he's not in the gym 7 days a week. But this was really easy. Again, almost all of the areas that I filled in with large amounts of thread were some form of the satin stitch, whether it was legitimately the satin stitch or not. Just stitches that on the back would appear very small and very close together, but then crossed large distances on the front. I promise you, it makes a huge difference, and you save so much thread using this method. I had a little bit of complications when it came with how I wanted to do the legs. I originally thought that I was going to want to do these vertical lines up the leg, and so that's kind of how I started on the first one, but I quickly realized that that just looked weird. It was doing some weird things to the shape, and it wasn't sitting right, and it was just distorting the anatomy, so I went back over, instead of undoing them, because it's kind of a pain to undo some of these stitches, instead of undoing them, I just went over them in a curved manner. Kind of curved, kind of just straight horizontal, but I do think it ended up suiting the shape of his body better and being the better aesthetic choice. So here's where I decided to outline that boning from the wing again, but in a color that matched the color of his body, because I thought it looked a little disjointed to have the dark blue be used as an outline and then also be the main structure for the wings. So I re-outlined it in that light blue. Also, you can see that I outlined the tentacles and the belly patch with the dark blue thread. The belly patch didn't really need it, but since I went to the trouble of outlining the full tentacles, it looked a little awkward to have that separation and not have that thread there. I didn't do any of the other sections because I thought it fit and it worked just fine. You can let me know if you think differently. So now that I'm happy with the design, it's time to actually try to finish it and turn it into a patch. So I cut out a random circle of white cotton fabric. It's just basically a stiff linen that has no stretch to it whatsoever. And I used fabric glue very thoroughly over the entire back surface of the project, attached the white to it, put a piece of saran wrap over the patch, and then I put a bunch of books on top of it to press it down and make it really nice and flat. I did the saran wrap because I figured if somehow it stuck to it, it really wasn't that big of a deal, but I really didn't want it sticking to my books, so that was just kind of my little security layer. Was there something better to use? Maybe. But after it was set and dried, I took it out of its little stack and I cut it more down to shape. I left a pretty wide border at edges. I kind of wanted to be able to fold it under and protect against any fraying or any of those kinds of problems, and have what I could try to get to be a relatively consistently thick border around the whole thing. Then was the last but not least tedious task of sewing around all of the edges. I picked a corner to start, and it was just around. This isn't a pillowcase stitch, this isn't anything fancy. I'm just consistently always coming up through the bottom of the fabric and catching that edge. There is some tension that I'm keeping on the line. It varies depending on where I was, depending on how much fabric glue was in the thing. Did I need to pull it really tight because it was really stiff? Did I cut it too small and it needed to be a little bit looser? So, you know, the tension kind of varied depending on where on the patch I was, but there was tension and I was consistently trying to be conscious of the size of the edge that I was making. And it took me about 2 hours to finish going around and doing the edge for this whole thing. So, here he is. Not pictured, and the last thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take some fabric glue and just run it around the very outer edge of all of these little frayed bits and try to fold them over to the back to make it look a little bit cleaner. I'm not filming that just because I'm not entirely sure what glue I want to use, but I'll put it in the description as far as how I generally finished it out. But he's got some pretty good structure as far as, you know, feeling like an actual patch. There's certain areas that I do think could have used a little bit more fabric glue. You know, and this side of the wing is very flimsy, so I may actually try to put some in there. The main reason I'm only going to put it on the edge and not in the center is I want this center seam to be available, so if I stitch it onto something, I can use black thread and just go in the gap between the border and the actual design and make that pretty easy to stitch on. But I mean, he's freaking adorable. I'm not entirely sure what I'm going to put him on yet, but I made a patch. I've never done this before. I've only done one other embroidery project, and that I've just kept in the frame. So actually turning this into something that I can now put on my own clothes. And overall, embroidery is so much cheaper than other things that I've done because each of these little loops of the thread, I'm not entirely sure what they're called, mini skeins, we'll call them, are only like 66 cents except for these very shiny ones. The shiny one that I used here and here, those are both, I think, closer to $1. But overall, this was a very cheap project because I already had the fabric and everything. I already had the glue. So I might be making more of these to come. Pro tip, if you're looking for something that's actually relatively low cost to entry, embroidery and or cross-stitching might be one of them. So I really hope you enjoyed this video. I apologize, the camera keeps shaking. I keep leaning on the table. If you made it to this point in the video, thank you so much. You might as well hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. I know it's a little bit different than the videos I've been posting recently, but here's hoping it's something that you like and you'll stick around. Much appreciated. I've been growing a good bit recently, and it's been kind of exciting. So welcome to all of the new faces. If this is only your second video that you're watching and the last ones were the Mandalorian videos, I apologize for quite the change in content, but I've got a lot more stuff coming the way. Some of it's cosplay, some of it's not, like this. So I hope you stick around to see what I'm doing. But regardless, thank you for visiting my little corner of the internet, and I will see you in the next one.